questions that lie at the heart of democracy. So what better occasion than Human Rights Month in South Africa to talk about digital citizens' rights in South Africa, in Germany, and all over the world. I would believe, as I come from diplomacy and from the world of politics, that the ultimate goal, the ultimate objective of digital rights should be to have a majority, a large majority of enlightened, informed, and mature digital citizens. A critical mass of people who are able to withstand, the challenges of populism, of fake news, of propaganda, and of alternative news. I think the goal should be for all of us to make a contribution to a democratic, equitable, tolerant, diverse society in South Africa, once again, in Germany, and any place else. And as Markus Beckedahl joins us today in Berlin, I'd just like to remind you that this explosion of information that we feel is very new with the internet, I believe is not that new. In 1929 and 1930, just about a little more than 90 years ago in Berlin, I think there were 47 daily newspapers, and they had morning editions, they had midday editions, they had late night editions, and evening editions sometimes. So you had an explosion of information where everybody could find whatever he or she were looking for in those newspapers. And then 3 years later, the brown shirts had taken over in Germany. I'm not saying that there's any direct link between the one or the other. Well, one can say at least that this explosion of information through newspapers and information available through newspapers has not prevented the rise of fascism and of Nazism in Germany. And who knows? We might never find out. It might have made a contribution with its echo chambers, with its invention of propaganda, according to Goebbels, with its populism, with its fake news. It might even have made a contribution to what happened in 1933 and the tragedy and disaster that it unfolded ever after. Now, I'm happy and grateful that we have such an esteemed panel tonight of experts that discuss some of those questions with us. I hope that Deputy Minister Kekane will join us. She is on her way. We have Markus Beckedahl, a real renowned German journalist who has been on the forefront of digital citizenry for a long time, and our South African expert, Tina Power. I would like to thank all our partners who have made this possible. Media Monitoring Africa, led by William Bird, the Goethe-Institut that is hosting us tonight, and everybody who's joining us on Zoom, on Facebook, on Twitter, or wherever you might be. Let's start the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. And to kick us off, we are exploring our first theme for the day, which is data protection. And here's a little video to give you a snapshot of what's been cooking.
The second part of the discussion looked at digital literacy and the rights charter developed by Media Monitoring Africa and children. And this is something we've been working on for over a decade now. And some of the key issues in this discussion was, how do we deal with it? Who needs it? And how do we seek to address the issue, particularly with children? And here are some of the key elements that were emphasized by participants. Once again, the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach was highlighted, in that you want an inclusive policy that involves child participation. You need to have the government, the private sector, and civil society involved. When dealing with digital literacy and children in particular, you cannot assume that children are of one age. The needs of a 3-year-old and that of a 16-year-old are radically different, and the process of navigation differs as well. And policy needs to take this into account. In as much as it sounds like an easy thing to gain digital literacy skills, one of the key trends that emerged was that we need a nuanced approach. In dealing with this, as such, parents need to be equipped with skills to help protect their children from harmful uses and also show them the opportunities they can gain. The last discussion point dealt with the specific aspects of universal access that should be prioritized in relation to children and school readiness. A number of issues were raised by participants, and contributions clearly indicated that some of the most important elements of access that need to be prioritized include equipment, devices, and data. Participant contributions included the following points, and the common agreement was there's still a long way to go. The importance of teachers and parents gaining knowledge of digital literacy were stressed, and that unless we don't adapt a national digital literacy program, we are not going to get far. Participants also highlighted that all schools and children need access, and this will be discussed in the next theme.
The Deputy Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies and recognizes the vital importance of bridging the digital divide. Deputy Minister Kekana is also an African diplomat as the patron of the Pan-African Business Women's Association. With that, I hand it over to you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much. I have just arrived. And thanks to all our viewers. The topic that is very important for this evening, it's more about the safety of our learners and what is it that we're doing as government to make sure that little ones in the digital space are protected, and what is the role of government. And I think from where we stand, we also take cue from the UN Children's Rights Commission, but also our Bill of Rights is also very clear on the protection of children. And now that we have what we call the Schools Act in government, we now have to align the Schools Act to what online safety also speaks to. So it means we have to work very, very close with our schools, including the parent component in amending the Schools Act to make sure that some of the things that speaks to what confronts us today has to look into. I think if you look at COVID and how it has exposed us, not only ourselves as South Africa, but also the needy communities out there, issues of connectivity become very, very critical. Now, what we have done is the department through SA Connect and our broadband in Fraco, we focusing more on the 7 provinces for connectivity, excluding Gauteng and the Western Cape, precisely because Gauteng is rolling out broadband through Gauteng broadband network, and the Western Cape is also doing some of the connectivity through its agency. But we also need to commend the Western Cape province because they have put together an online safety commission. They are working closer with our Film and Publications Board to make sure that certain elements or most elements that confront little ones online also has to be looked into through the commission, and then work towards enacting some of those things. And we think it's a step in the right direction. We're saying as the department, it is important that when we speak about online safety and the challenges that confront our kids, parents should not be left behind. The current situation of engaging on cybersecurity for learners and little ones should also include them, because when we talk about these things and not involve those who are affected, it becomes a problem. Let's get their conversation. Let's hear what their inputs are and how they think, what are the things that confront them. And I'm always saying, some of us were born before technology, so you don't have to guess how old am I. But one of the things that we have learned as parents was, we deemed it fit to want to put security features in our houses, fences, technologies, and other things. Well and good. But we forget that when we buy these gadgets and not put firewalls, even if the safety of our kids is intact, but they get exposed online. So in the same way that we took pains as parents to understand the protection of our houses, without waiting for government to teach you how to put those security features on the gadget of the children that you buy for, please, parents, do the same and make sure that our kids are protected. Of course, platform owners also, you don't need to wait for government to say, step up. There are certain things that you can do. I mean, if you look at the syntax issues where we had to put systems for those who are smoking, those who drink, and so on and so on. There's also an addiction from parents and children's side into the internet. And we are saying, without us even saying to your Google and Facebook and everybody who play in that space, please do something to assist little ones on these areas. They too can also make a contribution without government pushing them in all these things. So these are some of the conversations that we have to get and partner with institutions like these ones. And thanks to William Bate and his team for organizing something like this. Partner with the private sector, partner with civil society, because government alone cannot be able to deal with some of these things. I hope I covered some of the things that you wanted me to cover. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. Looking forward to a further chat as the evening continues. And now we move to our second theme of the night, which is around data protection. We shall show you a short video and then we'll head straight to our next speaker.
Our discussion on AI and data protection started with the question, how can we be responsible digital citizens? And what steps can we take to protect our personal data? As we all know that AI implicates our personal information. Participants felt strongly that there are in fact a number of practical ways that one can take responsibility for their own personal data, such as ensuring that your privacy settings in apps are set in a manner that protects your data, and being cautious of how information can be easily gathered through the usage of things such as location being on or visiting a dodgy website. In short, knowledge of cyber safety is key. The second part of this discussion took quite a turn, as it was in relation to whether is there a meaningful role for AI to play in the advancement of digital rights. And participants felt strongly that there is indeed a meaningful role for AI to play. However, we need to be aware that AI is not only used for commercial exploitations or for negative reasons. AI is increasingly going to be involved in our daily lives and in everything that we do. And from the workshop participants, it was evident and clear that AI can be indeed used positively in the way that citizens can benefit from, such as drones transporting medication and machine learning. However, one of the key issues that were highlighted was we need to be deliberate and transparent about the assumptions and drivers of AI. How can we see that it is indeed beneficial for citizens? The hot question that transpired was, should AI be regulated and how? The participants felt very strongly that AI should be regulated. As with any new technology introduced, at some point it has to be regulated because it has the potential to cause harm if left be. A human rights approach is essential. We need a multinational regulation because through certain crises, it has been evident that the nature of AI could be designed and operated from a different country. How do we regulate that for Africa in a manner that it has a rights-based approach?
It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next panelist, who is joining us from Berlin, Germany, Markus Bickerdahl. Markus Bickerdahl is a German journalist, political activist, and co-founder of the annual Republika conference, which concerns itself with social media and the digital society. In 2002, Bickerdahl founded a blog with the name netspolitik.org, which by now has transformed into a fully fledged news platform for digital liberty, of which he is the chief editor. Markus, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pity I can't be with you in sunny South Africa. It snowed this morning in Berlin. I've been once in South Africa and I met a lot of strong people fighting for digital social justice and digital rights in a growing digital civil society. And my favorite Linux distribution, Ubuntu, has roots in South Africa. So I like your country a lot. I don't know where to start. There are so many topics you debated this week. Let's start with privacy. Privacy is a human right, but this human right is useless when we live in a data capitalism ecosystem as we do it. We depend on some companies who control the digital world. These companies are based in the United States, like Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and co. And in Germany and in the European Union, we try to fight the system with stronger data protection laws as the GDPR, the European data protection laws. But we also found that the best data protection laws are useless if you don't have strong regulatory bodies to fight for our rights. So we need more employees at our consumer rights agencies and at our data protection agencies to fight for our rights. And online, our lives are being tracked and spied all the time, which is a huge problem. We wouldn't agree if our analog life would be surveilled as much as it's being done online by companies and secret services. So we need to stop the mass surveillance systems, as we learned in the Snowden revelations. It's huge and massive, and Germany is also part of this mass surveillance system, which is a huge problem. And it isn't compatible with our civil digital rights, as our Supreme Court decided this last year. In the meantime, until we stop this mass surveillance system, we need to train more people to use digital self-defense tools to save from mass surveillance. So you can also be part of this self-defense movement by using privacy-friendly alternatives as the messenger signal or encrypt your emails. But this knowledge has to be educated to the people how to use it. And sometimes these tools aren't as easy to use as they should be. So the state should be able to fund open source projects to protect our privacy rights.
Thank you so much for that. That was a very, very helpful input to get us started on this discussion. And of course, as we are gathered here, we are here to discuss digital rights. And you cannot discuss that without mentioning access and inclusion. And we shall kick you off with a video once again before I turn to my next guest.
The last part of the workshop interrogated the issues of access and inclusion. The participants had the following contributions. Access and inclusion is essential to exercise democratic rights, and it is important to highlight how under COVID-19 regulations, access has been vital, and they stressed the ability to learn, communicate online, and having access to online services were key. When we spoke about what are some of the barriers that currently exist in South Africa, Regarding access and inclusion, participants felt that some of the main barriers include digital literacy, access challenges for elderly and people with disabilities, as well as reliable infrastructure. We need to be innovative in providing access to everyone, and in doing so, we are avoiding the reality of situations such as schools being targets of theft when being provided with devices such as tablets. One of the running themes of this part of the discussion was we need to have a rights-based approach in dealing with access and inclusion, because if we do not have this approach, we will entrench the digital divide and people will continue to be excluded. The final point by the participants emphasized how we need to consider how digital citizens can access online spaces that are safe and inclusive. One of the key suggestions was to ensure that digital literacy, awareness, and educational programs such as web rangers are implemented and expanded to reach a wider audience. Other suggestions included participation in government policy discussions and draft legislations on these issues, and most importantly, community empowerment.
And I turn to my next guest, who is Tina Power. Tina is an attorney of the High Court of South Africa and a member of the Legal Practice Council. She presently also acts as an associate at Power Singh Inc. Tina focuses on public law and information rights with an interest in constitutional law and democratic institutions, children's rights, online harms reduction, equality, and non-discrimination. Tina, I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's an honor and a privilege to be surrounded by so many wonderful people who are so excited about these issues. I was also fortunate enough to have participated earlier on in the week with the participants who engaged with these issues. And it was really meaningful and exciting to see everyone grappling with these issues and coming up with positive ways that we can become meaningful digital citizens in such a critical time. Based on the video we just watched, I want to break down 3 issues in a bit more detail that can hopefully feed into our discussion a bit later. The first is around access as a rights issue. And as the ambassador said earlier, in South Africa, we are in Human Rights Month. On Monday, we will be celebrating Human Rights Day. And it is really important that we recognize access to the internet as an enabler of so many rights. We can see that access advances our rights to freedom of expression, access to information, to education, to healthcare. It allows us to mobilize and participate. It allows us to find out about sexual and reproductive health rights. It opens this wonderful array of so many opportunities and exciting moments that if we really want to truly engage as digital citizens, we should, as was said earlier, view this as a rights issue so that we place it in the correct forum and we give it the correct prominence that it deserves. That being said, there are, regrettably, still significant barriers to access in South Africa. And these are broken down in sort of quite structural ways, but then also when you are online, you face barriers and moments of exclusion as well. Structurally, we know that in South Africa, there are difficulties with the cost of data. We know that there are difficulties with infrastructure, and we see that people in the urban areas and the rural areas are not receiving the same type of access. We also know that while there have been amazing technological advancements for persons with disabilities, there are still significant barriers. And we see all of these digital divides playing out along the very same lines that we see structurally causing harm and inequality and exclusion in our everyday lives. We then, as was discussed earlier, see issues around once you've overcome those barriers, those infrastructural barriers of getting online, once you're online, you may not be safe. You may not understand the privacy policies. You may not understand how the forums work. You may be disclosing personal information in a problematic way. And all of these things are really important to overcome as well. So we need to understand overcoming barriers in quite a practical sense, but also once we're online, we need to figure out how to make these spaces safe. And one of the really exciting things that we discussed earlier on the week was around how we can be positive citizens and positive digital citizens, how we can call out harmful behavior when we see people being racist or sexist or misogynistic on online platforms. What is our role? Do we speak out? Are we going to call this out? When we see hurtful comments, when we see deep fakes that are perpetuating gender-based violence, what is our role as a digital citizen to change this, to adjust the status quo so that the harms we are seeing offline are not the same as being online? Another really exciting component that we discussed was how we can practically support members of our community. Can we sit down with our parents over this weekend? Monday's a public holiday. I think all of us may have some time to teach our grandmothers or someone in our community how to buy data and how to use WhatsApp video calls so that you can communicate more effectively. You can teach your younger sibling or someone in your community about online privacy practices and how they could understand terms and conditions when they're signing up to social media platforms. There are all these small and really easy ways in which we can, as citizens, engage in this process. The Deputy Minister was right. All of this shouldn't fall on the government and all of it shouldn't fall on the big companies. There are indeed responsibilities that do lie there, but we also have responsibilities. And we must also take the initiative to participate meaningfully and ensure that we can be teaching each other and learning together so that these spaces are exciting and they are beautiful and they are safe. Because the internet, it really is beautiful and has so much potential if we contribute appropriately to it and we allow people to access it and access it in a meaningful way where the contributions are truly spectacular.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that input. Before we take questions and answers, I want to throw out a couple of thoughts from some of the sentiments that have been expressed and allow us to have a discussion. So, as has been mentioned, we have seen a rapid rise in access. But of course, this rapid rise in access has been quite unevenly spread. And not everybody, in fact, what it has created is a replication of hierarchies of citizenship, right? Now, repeatedly, as you've mentioned, the privacy policies and so on, that there are also many barriers. And one of these we cannot ignore is language. A country like South Africa is an English minority country, right? And most of these privacy policies are actually not in our own languages. So the concern becomes, are we giving up on holding platforms accountable, right? When we say that individuals should understand these terms and conditions, have we given up the idea that actually it is the responsibility of the platform to have its default settings as private, and then the individual can undo it? You know what I mean? We are not all actually going to learn about privacy policies. It's just unrealistic. So I'm not sure who wants to kick us off. I shall turn to you, Deputy Minister.
No, I think you're very right. And one of the things, I think, was it a week or 2 weeks ago when we had a session with Goethe-Institut, where they were launching a platform, an app on gender-based violence.
Yes.
And that app was about assisting women, girl children, when they are not in a safe space to say, this is how you upload it and so on and so on. The first thing that we picked up there was a language barrier, because not everybody will be able to read and write or even speak English, and especially looking at our demographics in the South African situation, and the fact that most of our women, because of the historical challenges that confront us, the literacy levels are very low. And the challenge that we have also put to that forum and said to Goethe-Institut, institutions like UNISA and them are engaging in initiatives of this nature to start to translate some of the things in official languages of South Africa so that not everybody is left behind. So language becomes the biggest barrier in this kind of a situation. And I think I agree with you that even the platform economy of the people who owns some of these things really have to start to invest in assisting their own customers, because I believe we are their loyal customers, and they should be able to assist us on how we can also not be left behind, especially looking at the previously disadvantaged in the rural areas.
Okay, there's a couple of thoughts that you mentioned that I would like to come back to. But before we do that, I want to turn to you, Tina, on the very same question.
Sure, I think it's a brilliant question, and I think the Deputy Minister has covered it really well. But maybe to just reflect on some of the wonderful work that Media Monitoring Africa is doing to try grapple with these issues. So terms and conditions as a concept are very overwhelming. I'm a trained lawyer. I've been studying for several years, and I've recently read all of the terms and conditions of all the social media platforms. And to be honest, I don't understand all of them. They're really complicated, and they use difficult language that seeks to blindside us and make us agree to things that we really don't understand. But Media Monitoring Africa is doing some really amazing work in trying to break this down and understand what is being said and what may be harmful and hurtful. And then we also have programs like the Web Rangers, where we're teaching young children about digital literacy and how they can be aware of it. So I appreciate that language is really difficult, and we do need to overcome it, but we also need to be putting pressure on the tech companies who are drafting these terms and conditions that are just so inaccessible for everyone, even trained technical people, trained legal people. And then if we break it down further, I think the Deputy Minister in her presentation earlier around digital literacy and the importance of children understanding their safety online and parents supporting that as well, I think we can overcome language barriers there as well. We can explain to each other within our communities, within the languages that we understand and we're comfortable with, having a person who has some level of digital literacy, paying it forward, and then helping and empowering their communities can be one way in which we can do it. Taking down the tech giants, sure. There's definitely that, and we should consider it as well, but we can also, again, take some responsibility ourselves and work together so that we can break down these complicated contracts that we have to sign to be on these platforms, even though we don't know what they mean.
Ambassador, I would like to turn to you. I mean, quite a similar thing in terms of language and so on. But of course, as a much more global language, there are many more options available. But Germany has been doing some incredible work, really trying to put in place, regulatory mechanisms and using legislation, to attempt to hold these platforms accountable, to something. Any lessons that you want to share with us from that experience?
First of all, I would like to say just 2 or 3 sentences on your first question, if you allow. I think there's no reason to be despondent about the developments of communication and digital citizenry in Africa. Yes, there are some backlogs in terms of the infrastructure. Yes, there are problems linked to equality and poverty and access. But I think South Africa is a very good example for what can be done to counter that. And the pressure that is created by this inequality, I think in Africa as a whole, has created spaces for creative thinking that made sure, for example, that online banking was somehow developed in Africa. That people with smartphones who didn't have landlines, who didn't have computers, had a certain need, and this need was being catered for by a number of companies, for example, for online banking or for a number of other services that people in Africa needed. So I think there is ample space to believe that Africa can be something of a place where new things in the digital space come up. It's not only that Africa is lagging behind in something. I think to the contrary, Africa is a space of creativity. Now, it's not the first time in the development of our economies that monopolies have come up. And what Marcos has been talking about, those monopolies that not only originate in the United States, but they originate in a couple of counties in California. Those monopolies are not good for us, I believe. And I think the conscience about a necessity to reform it and to break down monopolies, and wherever you come from, you can be socialist or capitalist, whatever, monopolies are never good, I believe. it has been recognized in the United States of America. I do believe that the American Senate has done a lot of great work to think about what can be done in order to make sure that those monopolies don't abuse their monopolies, both in terms of the money making, but also in terms of the privacy regulations, in terms of the access issues, in terms of the abuse of the data, the big data that they gather in order to make their profits. And I do believe that we need an international approach to it. I think, well, the German government is willing to do that. It is not easy because it's never easy to tackle monopolies. The European Union is willing to do that, maybe not with the same speed that Marcos would ask of us, I suppose, but it is happening. And maybe in a couple of years, we see a completely different situation. I'm quite confident that the global citizenry and with it, governments understand that something needs to be done.
Thank you so much. Marcus, I want to turn to you right now, just I've had a bit of a reflection on your opening remarks. Now, one of the things about the digital landscape, we often think of governments and big tech players, as the only players in that space. But we've also seen, for example, commercial interests have amassed like massive power beyond big tech. So one example that immediately comes to mind is the duopolistic hegemony of Visa and MasterCard, who make up most of global payment processing that happens over the internet, and the role that they have played when it comes to censorship and who is able to make money from the internet and who's excluded from that. I'd love to hear a few thoughts from you on the issue.
Oh, it's a tough question. I'm not really the expert of credit card systems, but we found out in the past 10 years that we rely a lot of their infrastructures, and they have the ability to control who is being able to sell services or not, and especially for civil society organizations. It's a huge problem if you rely on funding. And this funding comes through donations over the internet, and MasterCard and Visa used their monopoly to block your funding or your being able to get donations. Then you can't finance your human rights work. And this is why we need more other competitors, more competition in this market. And I'm very happy that you have a lot of more companies being founded in Africa to deal with it. But let me go back to another question you debated before. It's about digital media literacy. And it's very interesting that you always talked about school kids being trained. This is a very important issue, but maybe we have another debate in Germany because we have an older society. And I think the biggest problems we do have are not school kids, but are older people who didn't grow up with digital technologies and feel a bit lost. For example, they haven't learned how to deal with conspiracy theories because they grew up in a media environment where you could trust information through media. And now older people receive YouTube videos and information over WhatsApp, and they believe everything and send it to all their friends. And so conspiracy theories have a huge reach out, which is a problem. And up to now, we expected that digital media literacy falls from the sky if you buy a smartphone. Instead, we are going online with a TV and radio station in our pocket, and everybody is surprised that a lot goes wrong. So in the past, media literacy was understood as being able to hold a camera. And in these days, we need more understanding about privacy, security, digital self-defense, copyright, business models of data capitalism, tracking, the whole surveillance stuff. These are only some skills we need to learn until we become informed citizens, which we aren't. And these competences can be trained locally, especially in libraries or using school buildings to reach out to older people. And we could use public television, for example, to train and inform people, as we did in Germany in the past, giving information how to participate in our traffic system? Why don't we use these ways to get more people trained in media literacy?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's such an interesting thing that you raise, Marcus, right? Because people who have been online immediately and longer would potentially be able to use it much more intuitively, right? And what are we saying about those who just never had access and for the longest time ever? But before we explore that question a bit more, I would be quite interested in finding out from you, Deputy Minister, I am putting you on the spot here as our government representative, right? In your opinion, has government done enough, to provide access to people in this country?
In as far as broadband and internet is concerned.
And what more do you think can be done if there are any gaps?
Well, I think looking at where we have been and where we are in as far as internet penetration is concerned, in broader terms, as government, we're doing our best. And this is also attributed to what Internet Government Forum has also, the IGF rating that said, looking at South Africa vis-a-vis the entire continent. But where we're sitting, we cannot pat ourselves on the shoulders to say we have done enough, because we know many of our rural far-flung areas still have challenges. The Deputy President of the Republic at some point was confronted by a question in Parliament where he was even saying, today many people want to talk about 5G, and many of our rural areas are still at 2G and so on. And we know it is because of the topography and other related things. So the challenges of infrastructure will always be there. But what gives us comfort is the determination. And if you look at when President Cyril Ramaphosa took office, one of the commitments he did was in the next, during this time of this administration, at least 14 million tablets should be distributed to little ones. Little did we know that there'll be COVID and all these things. So the challenges that confront us is to make sure that we leapfrog and make sure that we move up to speed, especially for schools, for clinics, for hospitals, and our focus is more in the rural areas. So we're going to what we call the second phase of broadband rollout, and the DBSA, Development Bank of South Africa, is working with our department, which is the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, to look at how we should move into the phase 2 of connecting schools, connecting hospitals as we prepare for NHI, and even connecting clinics. So we're working towards that. Of course, we are proud of the work that the private sector is doing, because if you look at some of the access that are there in the rural areas, these big corporates have also made it possible for us. All the telcos that operate in the country have been partnering with us to reach out to rural areas, and especially schools for disabled people. I mean, MTN has a deliberate, and I'm not working for MTN, but they have a deliberate program to connect schools for people, learners with disability. And the foundation is doing just that and making sure that they too are not left out. So we must commend the private sector where they are doing very well. Of course, other embassies are also with us. It's a few of them, you know, I'm a Lutheran, so I'll always be tempted to say the German embassy. So there are embassies that also are working with us, especially on the outreach program and digital literacy program to make sure that we don't leave parents and little ones behind, including UNISA, which is also a big partner in this regard.
Well, Minister, Deputy Minister, I understand that you do not work for MTN, but I do hope that as we think about what they claim to be doing, we do remember that they have been profiteering from ripping off their consumers for a very, very long time. Not plow back. They must correct their historic mistakes and current mistakes on the spot. Tina, I want to turn to you because you mentioned the Web Rangers program, you know, as something that excites you in terms of capacity building. Are there any other programs that you can think of that come to mind? You know, are there any other programs that are doing perhaps digital rights material translations, or what gaps do you see in that capacity building space?
So that's a great question. And I'm probably going to leave William to answer some of those in his concluding remarks, given that he's at the forefront of this. But I do think there are amazing platforms and options out there. And I think we can learn from partners around the world who are engaging with this. Countries all across Europe, countries in South America have really phenomenal programs where children are learning and engaging with these different issues. And so I think we don't always need to reinvent the wheel. I think we can learn from other spaces and places that are doing amazing things. But from a translating perspective and from digital literacy materials, it's something that I've been thinking about doing for quite some time. And it's something that we're actively working on at the moment, is creating toolkits for learners and for young children that are accessible across a variety of languages, because that's really what matters. And it's with fun characters. We've seen really wonderful children's books. A close friend and colleague of ours wrote a book called Boris the Baby Bot, and that was about big surveillance. And that was a fun novel about a little robot who went and stole everyone's personal data. And that taught children about what surveillance means in a relatable way for them. So there are these fun ways in which we can break down complicated topics like the internet, like data privacy, like surveillance, and make them accessible to children. And we need to, I think, understand what children are excited about at the moment, what children understand. I've seen with my nieces and nephews, they pick up a tablet and they can do everything that I can do and better, and they're 5 and 6. And so we need to appreciate and understand that they already know so much. And it's just about making them understand what's good and what's bad and what's harmful and what's not, in languages and in tones and in ways that are meaningful and helpful to them.
Okay, thank you so much. But, before we continue this discussion, I will be taking questions from members of our audience who have joined us today. And I turn to you, Amimi.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, my question that I posted here was what methods, this is to the minister, to the deputy minister, what methods can be used to educate people about the digital world dynamics, particularly in remote areas? And I'm asking this because where I'm from, the digital divide is so evident. And my next question would be, I understand because I've lived in the two countries that are part of this discussion, Germany and South Africa. And the digital divide in the country, Germany, is not as high as it is in South Africa. We have observed that as a Zulu-speaking person, if I post something on Facebook or any other social media platform, I cannot translate it. It just translates something that is not true, or it's not of any language. Is the government working towards connecting with such platforms and getting these languages translated on these platforms? And don't they think that can create job opportunities for people in a country that has about 9 African languages?
Thank you, Amimi. Can I deal with the last one? And I want to take it from where His Excellency, our ambassador, has just said, that where we identify gaps, it's an opportunity for young people to become innovative. Here's an opportunity for people to realize that language is the biggest barrier. And we have what we call CSIR in South Africa. We also have the Department of Science and Innovation. And this is where young people are given an opportunity to bring their IPs and put at the front, and government is able to fund some of these things and assist. And these are the things that we would want to encourage young people to do, and make sure that at least the issue of the language barrier is also dealt with. Like I said, government alone may not be able to respond to some of those things. Now, coming to the issue of what programs do we do to reach out to our people to minimize the issue of the digital divide. I think we should commend initiatives like that are done by Media Monitoring Africa. And they're doing this in partnership with one of our agencies. We call it Filament Publications Board. And we also have the domain name .zetna, which also plays in the internet space. We normally do outreach programs to little ones in schools every year. Even this coming towards the end of this month, I'm in the Northwest the whole week to do outreach and safety on the internet. So that's what we are doing. And if you look at that program where Filament Publications Board is able to say to little ones, this is how you should behave on the internet, because what we normally say to young children is that internet does not have delete. Whatever you say, you do, and you post, you must know, even when you want to become a CEO tomorrow, when we Google you, that will come back. So that's how literally we take them through to make sure that at least we caution them not to. But the other thing that I thought we are doing very well as the South African government through Filament Publications is the classification of movies and so on, so that little ones don't consume content that is beyond their age. Now we should do same with the tech companies. We must have alerts in the internet where if you are below this age, it should be able to say, you don't have to play in this space, and so on and so on. So in the same way that we do classifications in the film and content consumption, we should also do the same when they want to access certain things in the internet. Thank you very much.
Lots of difficult positions that you have there, Deputy Minister. We shall engage with them in a little bit. But in the meantime, another question from an audience member asking, what can we learn from Germany and how they are dealing with AI and privacy? I'll start with you, Ambassador Schaefer, and then I'll come to you, Marcus. Please go for it.
I think Marcus should start because he knows those issues a lot better than I do, and he is, and rightfully so, critical with our government, so he should have the first say, I would say.
Yeah, we had a lot of working groups within the government debating the questions of how to deal with artificial intelligence in the last 2 or 3 years. We have also a governmental strategy for AI, which isn't really a strategy in my mind, because it's just a lot of measures we shall do, but without really being a strategy. So we don't really have goals we want to reach as for example, does Finland has? Finland has one goal that 1% of the population have to be trained in being able to understand AI. And in Germany, we think, oh, the problem will be solved by the market. I hope we will reach the point where we get strong regulatory bodies who can deal with artificial intelligence and which gets access to the data centers, for example, of the big platforms, to be able to control if the data is representative or if the data does failure. And we need better equipped data protection agencies and consumer rights organizations to fight for our rights so we don't have to deal with it. And we need, in general, a better understanding what is artificial intelligence, which opportunities it brings and which danger it brings. For example, one great example of a German startup is deepl.com. It's a better translation system as Google Translate, and it even has German data protection built in. So if you want to translate, maybe, I'm not sure if Zulu is built in the moment, but if I have to translate, for example, German text to English or back, I use DeepL and don't need really to fix the text after it. So AI has a lot of opportunities, but the dangers are that the data can be bad. And if the data is bad, we need democratic controls, how to deal with it. And we need, especially when it comes to content regulation, better democratic works, because the platforms are now switching to automatic content regulation. And this brings a lot of new questions. Who controls these upload filters? Who shall prevent us from terror propaganda and other things? And which rights do citizens have if an automatic decision will block our account in a market-dominant platform as WhatsApp or Facebook are? Do I have the right to go to some kind of digital court to fight for my rights against Facebook or not? These are questions we need, solutions for.
Marcus, don't you think we need an ombudsman of some kind, given what you have just spoken to, that we need to do audit from time to time on how people's private space has been breached, and then from time to time, as a recourse for me to protect my privacy, that we need an ombudsman who can then deal with some of these things? Or will we be over-regulating?
No, if I understand you correctly, we do have these kinds of ombudsmen in the regulatory bodies of privacy commissioners in Germany, but we need more technicians working for them. In the moment, they have lots of lawyers, and lawyers are great to understand terms of services of Facebook, or not, as we understood it before. But we need more technicians who are being able to understand how these systems work. And we need better access for these regulatory bodies, that they can go and take a look in how Facebook, for example, is working with their data. At the moment, we have an asymmetric power thing, because the platforms, they know everything. They have real-time control over what billions of people are doing on the platforms. But our regulatory bodies, they try to understand, and they don't have the access to these data. And we need to give them access to take a look for us, to control these big companies and platforms.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Ambassador Schaefer?
From what we're discussing here, it's quite clear this is all a new frontier, and things are very new, and things develop so dramatically fast that regulation will always lag behind to a certain extent. And the questions that Marcos has raised are the questions that governments across the world are trying to find proper answers to. Governments are not necessarily smarter, or not always smarter than civil society. Quite to the contrary, very often. So I think all the proposals that have been made, I think, are important, and we have to find ways and means to have a digital space in which the Bill of Rights and the fundamental rights of our citizens are equally preserved as in the analog world. I think that's very important. And you know, Tina, I fully agree that we need to do the best we possibly can to empower people, to give them the knowledge to understand what they do and to restrict infringements upon their privacies. But I think we need to come from two angles. It's like in other fields of policy, consumer protection. We need to try to empower and enlighten people. At the same time, states have a role to play here to preserve the rights of their citizens. And I think that I come from a country, just like in South Africa, where we have a Bill of Rights, where we have a wonderful constitution, and where it is the first and foremost obligation of a state to preserve the liberties and the freedoms of our citizens. There are other countries around, I won't mention them because everybody knows them, where it's different, where big data is abused against citizens. And there might be discussions of which country is worst on that. So I think the state has an obligation to set up a regulatory regime, just as Markus Beckedahl has explained that, to make sure that those citizens of us who are not able to reach that level of enlightenment, of empowerment, are protected nevertheless. And what the deputy minister has been talking about, the abuse of children, is just the tip of the iceberg, if you want, because there's so many issues in and around the rights of citizens that might get infringed upon in the digital space. So we have a lot of work to do, and this discussion makes that very obvious.
And I really appreciate your point about the responsibility of the state to preserve freedoms and liberties, because we have seen it happening and it's increasing, right? Where in fact states are colluding with these companies to drive repressive agendas, you know?
Well, I am always reminded, if you allow, just that one sentence when we talk about these issues, about this incredible novel of 1984 by George Orwell. And in many ways, things have gotten tenfold, hundredfold worse than what George Orwell had written in 1938, with this total observation by private and public data collectors. And I think that is the worst kind of world that we would ever want. We need a digital space that empowers people, that helps democracy to thrive, and all our rights to be lived in the digital space as in the analog space. But the danger is there that the exact opposite happens. So that's why it's so important that enlightened citizens and well-meaning states and governments work together to establish the right regulatory frame that makes sure that we get the best of all worlds.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I am going to turn over to another question from an audience member. Xander, please go for it.
Yes, thanks very much for the opportunity. It's exactly speaking to the current theme, the problems that we face in the digital space, like fake news, children's online safety that the Deputy Minister mentioned. These are issues that must be solved by regulation and through education. That can't be an individual sort of grassroots problem. We don't think that we should educate people about mathematics without the government. We have a system to provide basic education to people. So in the regulatory space, we have excellent regulation in the Protection of Personal Information Act, but it took almost 4 years to set up the information regulator. So it's such a slow process that it seems that government is really insensitive to the needs that the digital age has brought. And again, in education, why don't we have public education programs? This is what Marcus also said. Why don't we have public education programs to train people about fake news, about online safety, just like we have public information programs about HIV, which also took years for the government to implement because there's this disconnect with what the actual problems are.
Thank you very much. And this is a very, very important question, very close to some of us. Maybe I must declare up front that I'm a teacher by profession, and I taught at high school. And I think what you are saying, it's very important. There should be a deliberate public education program around online safety. Now, if you go into the initiatives that our government looked into, over and above having put the regulator together, President took a deliberate decision to put the 4IR commission within our department, and it has concluded its work and has taken its recommendations to the president. Now, I think you are aware that as the department, we are also responsible for digital migration. And the reason why we want to do that is for the SABC to have more platforms and channels where we can have a dedicated channel for education and a dedicated channel for health. If you look at what has been happening now during COVID, SABC has been forced to suspend some of its programs to accommodate the COVID-19 pronouncements and other things. So if we had moved as a department around ensuring that at least the 11 channels that we want the SABC to have, COVID could not have disrupted the SABC programs, but we could have used that health channel to then be able to allow the president or any minister or anything that has to do with health to be announced there. So that's why we are moving on the BDM so that we can have a dedicated channel. Part of it is to assist us to have these public education programs where we can share not only with little ones, because we are also saying parents also have to be taken on board on online safety and looking at the new developments and current issues that are in the internet now. The situation is dire, not only for little ones, but also for all of us as citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just something that I want to throw to you, Tina, the ambassador spoke about how this requires, quite a number of approaches in any other way that we'd be dealing with monopolies, for example. And what we do know is that some of our governments have failed to deal even with traditional companies. And here we are with these, new platforms. And of course, there's the international elements and so on. But one of the things that we do need are domestic laws that advance digital rights. There's massive gaps in South Africa. Can you please speak to that?
Sure, I think that's a really useful question. And I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that's been quite a common theme tonight, that while there's still a lot to do, we definitely are on the right track. I think the fourth Industrial Revolution report was an important starting point for us to start figuring this out. But I do think we need to act more robustly and more swiftly. Law reform is historically a slow-moving beast. And I think if we want to be responsive to the current challenges and the current opportunities, our laws need to be adaptive as well. But I had a really interesting discussion with an American digital rights activist a while ago, and he was quite nervous about the tension between technology developing so rapidly and laws having to constantly keep up. But that's not really what the position is. The position is that we have laws, we have a constitution, and we have Bill of Rights. Technological advancements need to meet that standard. It's not the other way around. It shouldn't be that we keep having to jump up and down every time the next technological advancement happens. And if that's this case, we're never going to be able to keep up because this is just happening too rapidly. So the standard is our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Other developments and advancements must meet that. And if and when we need further explanations or our laws to give further meaning to this, then it can be developed. But an exciting example I can give is something that's very close to my heart, and it's around gender-based violence. The current round of domestic violence legislations that Parliament is grappling with at the moment have started considering what online harms mean and what are the ways in which victims and survivors can address harms that have been facilitated or abetted in the online space. So our lawmakers are definitely thinking about these issues, and activists and feminists and lawyers are contributing to these law reform processes so that we can support lawmakers to make important laws that can help people who are dealing with contemporary harms. But this race between law and technology isn't always helpful. We need to just sometimes take a step back and realize we have this phenomenal Bill of Rights, and that's the standard that the technology needs to meet, not the other way around.
That is very, very helpful. And in fact, yeah, it is there. Why is it not enforced? I mean, one of the examples that was given was the limitations of the information regulator, how long it took to get set up, and just the capacity constraints that occurred, you know? Yeah, very, very fast.
But it also speaks to the kind of forums that South Africa participate into, especially if you take In Hope as an example, because that's where you also go as a country with all other countries to say, these are the challenges that you are seeing online. How do we make sure that the regulatory framework speaks to some of those things? So we share codes of good practice around those forums, and then we're able to come back and adapt our South African situation. It's true. I mean, if you look at, we have been talking about child pornography, and now within Hope, they call it child sexual abuse material and so on. So we are adapting because everybody now is moving towards that. And what it also says, certain things are the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, but other things, it's the Minister of Justice. And amongst ourselves, we have to share that information and make sure that there's collaboration and we deal with some of those things. So it helps a lot.
Absolutely. And I mean, that has been one of the difficulties, you know, the absence of cohesiveness between different departments, which has made things quite difficult. So Marcus, I want to turn to you quickly and ask you a question. If you had to advise governments on prioritizing expenditure, would you suggest they spend more on user education and empowering critical thinking, sex education, awareness of harmful content, or spend more on automated content controls? What is the better investment in the long term?
Oh, I would bet in every part or in every topic, and not only in one of these topics. For example, in Germany, when it comes to online harms, we have a debate about that we don't have enough awareness for the positions of survivors or victims within police and the justice. So we need to train them to understand that online harms can harm in real life too. We need, for example, more helplines for survivors and victims, which we didn't have in the past to solve some of the problems, but also we need lots of more education. So we can't really say, concentrate your money on education. We need everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Marcus. And you raised such an important point. The days of a false binary between online and offline are gone. In fact, we know what happens online has real world impact. And so we can't call one thing real life and the other isn't. And with that, I want to thank all of you for this amazing conversation that we just had. I wish we had more time because there's a lot a lot I would so love to ask you, but we unfortunately do have to come to a close now. Thank you so much, Marcus, for joining us from all the way from Berlin. We are grateful to have had you. But right now, I want to hand it over to Media Monitoring Africa's Executive Director, William Bird, who is one of the organizations that brought us all together this evening.
Watch me dance into the picture. I'm known for being inappropriate. Gosh, this is disconcerting. Let me stand. Oops, that's the reverse. Right. I'm trying not to block the. Oh, I should stand here. There you go. There. How ridiculous is that? Okay. Anyway, so I wanted to just say thank you very much to everyone. These are my concluding comments. We'd hoped that this would be really optimistic and positive, and I'm delighted to say that it was. You know, I'm not leaving this evening thinking, oh, well, there's another reason to go and have 5 more double whiskeys. Now I'm going to go and have 5 more double whiskeys to celebrate the fact that there's so many good and wonderful things to do and that we are on the right track. You know, the positivity, and I love the practical tips. Our fabulous facilitator managed to put our deputy minister on the spot more than a couple of times, but you answered with much graciousness and aplomb. Thank you so much for your honesty as well. And thank you, Ambassador, for your role in offering and support and consistently bringing us back to this idea that what we're doing is on the right track, you know, and also reminding us of our historical lessons and the comparisons. It's been really powerful. So thank you very much to our fabulous panelists, our fabulous facilitator, who we're a great fan of for reasons outside of this. Then a big thanks to our wonderful partners, the Goethe-Institut. Thank you for lending us your fabulous venue. I'm just very sad that there's only a handful of us in the room and not a room full of people, although probably a good thing now that there isn't a room full of people now for obvious reasons. But thank you very much for hosting us. As always, thank you to our lovely friends at the German Embassy. Sorry we gave you a few heart attacks in timing this week. We know it was a little difficult, and thank you so much to the Deputy Minister and your people for being so fabulous and accommodating. And then critically, a huge, huge thanks to my fabulous team, Handel in the background, who's hiding behind the screen, and Browser, my other wonderful colleague that is also hiding behind the screen somewhere. Thank you to everyone for joining us on your Friday evening. Please go forth and be positive. Ooh, think of one thing that you can do on Monday. I like Tina's challenge. One thing on Monday that you can do to share your skills, whether it might be with one of your relatives or your friends who's not so technologically able as you are. And it can be something as simple as using Zoom to something as far more challenging like using a mobile device. And thank you to Koketso again, because she's made her little children be with us because they're outside, not in the cold, obviously. I mean, we're not that cruel and heartless. Well, actually, they are outside in the cold, but we're not heartless at least. They've got food and everything. So thank you very much for bringing them and accommodating us. Thanks very much, everyone. I think we can wrap it up. Thank you. Good night.